There's definitely noise in the market. And what I would say is, but it's surpassed noise and it's becoming overwhelming chaos. And so you as a founder now have an additional responsibility to know what it's like to be a CISO, to actually live in the CISO's head and see what it's like to be on the front end of a battlefield.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. So today we have a very special guest, Steve Zalewski. Hello, Steve. How are you today?
Alon, good to see you again. Pleasure to be here.
Good to see you too. So, Steve, obviously I know you quite well. We've been working together. I know you as a CISO, advisor, mentor, investor, etc. But why don't you, before we dive into today's content, maybe just introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. And we'll keep this brief. So Steve Zalewski, former CISO Levi Strauss, which is where most people know me, and kind of my tagline at Levi's, and we'll talk about it here, was, how does what you do sell more jeans? As a business kind of centric view of cybersecurity. But prior to that, I spent half of my career building product. So I was on the other side building large enterprise products. I'm an engineer by trade, so to speak. And about 20 years ago, I moved from the engineering side of building product and getting patents and doing all that stuff into the operating side. So I went over to IT. And I've spent the last 20 years, most of it in cybersecurity across different verticals, deploying cybersecurity into companies and really finding that passion. And this is one of the hardest problems I've ever had to solve. And so in that time as an operating practitioner, as an architect, as deputy CISO, as CISO, I've really put a lot of time into understanding the security ecosystem and realizing we all have a common enemy, but for some reason, we're not focused that way.
So I appreciate you introducing yourself real quick here. What we want to talk about today, Steve, is what I call cutting through the noise, which is really a series of a few podcast episodes. Some of the challenges that we are seeing specifically in the cybersecurity industry, where there are thousands of cybersecurity vendors. Some of the numbers are saying something like 3,500, 4,000, whatever the number may be. What are your thoughts about what I call cutting through the noise and the noise in the market as a whole?
Well, there's definitely noise in the market. And what I would say is, but it's surpassed noise and it's becoming overwhelming chaos. And if I look at this not as security, but just selling sneakers, okay, which is, I don't need 4,000 vendors selling me sneakers. And you have 4,000 vendors doing that. The articulation of how they're different is so granular that we lose the ability to differentiate. And so cutting through the noise is definitely a good way of characterizing it. But the first thing I start with is, you're selling security products. You're not selling sneakers. People are attacking us. This is unfortunately a war of the bad guys trying to get through the security village to take down all of our companies. And if you think about it that way, we as the village, trying to raise our children, have got to do a lot more to work together with each other. We've got to take a shared responsibility and not try to climb over each other. And so I think cutting through the noise is a challenge for us as a security industry to realize we do have a common enemy, and it's not each other. And we need to take that perspective to do better at describing what we do and what we don't do.
I think that we all agree that confusion is the enemy of all, enemy of success, definitely. And when there's so much noise, that's a recipe for confusion. especially like you just said, when things or definitions are not as granular, it's really easy to get lost in ocean of offers from different vendors, and to really understand how to tie that to a problem that you as a customer, you as a buyer, you as a CISO needs to really, really address. The other thing that I found interesting is that the success rate, when we think about startups, and obviously you have lots of experience advising and working with startups, the survival, I call it survival rate, but the success rate of startups is pretty abysmal. It's around 5%. That's the most recent number that I checked. Out of all of cybersecurity companies are actually being able to make it. And I read somewhere that out in the last 20 years, there were about 20,000 cybersecurity vendors, out of which only 20 went IPO, went public. So I'm curious from your perspective, when you're working and and advising founding teams and innovators, what is this something that is discussed? Is this something that within the context of confusion and so many offers in the industry, how innovators, how founders, from your experience, are trying to solve for this challenge?
Yes. And that is a day one question that I'll often ask a founder, which is, if they're starting a company, what is success look like? And in some cases, you'll hear founders say, I want to build the best company I can and have it be here for 20 years. Because they're passionate about solving a problem and they want to build a great company to do that. You'll hear other founders that understand that I don't want to do this for 20 years. What I want is I want it to be more transactional. I actually have a problem I want to solve, but my goal then is to sell it to another company that wants to take it further. And so that is a hard conversation you actually want to have early, because it also sets the stage for when you want to exit, the way that you want to market your company for exit, and especially if you start to take venture capital funds. Because if you're doing it yourself and you're growing it from the ground up, you have a lot of say. Once you take venture capital, okay, now they have a say. And if the two are not aligned, you can see where there can be a lot of friction. And as a startup, the last thing you want to do is, again, be fighting about money when you ultimately want to be building a market.
So the next question that comes to mind is, with the different moving parts, right? So you have the investors, you have the founding team, you have sales, marketing, the field team, and sometimes there's even friction among teams. Not everybody is in 100% alignment, but one thing is a constant, hopefully, and that constant is the buyer. The buyer is still a CISO, and the buyer is living today in a pretty complex environment with lots of challenges from different directions, especially in current environment and current economy. I'm curious, from your perspective, what can companies can do to reduce that friction, not just among themselves, but between themselves and the buyer, to be able to really help the buyer, the CISO, see the value in their innovation?
Yes. And I would say, and I wish I could turn the time clock back 10 years, because I would say if it was 10 years ago, we'd actually have a pretty good answer to what to do here. Because 10 years ago, it was primarily a technology problem, and that most CISOs were technologists, most today still are technologists, who are implementing security to secure their company. And so working for the CIO, it's get the technology in and the people in process adjust. Whereas today, I don't think that's as much the case. With 4,000 products, there's too much technology. There's too much overlap. There's too much repetitive capability. And so we've now, as technologists, been overwhelmed by the companies and the companies that we protect between on-prem and cloud and AI have a very different conversation we have to have. And I'll characterize it this way. A CISO used to be a technologist. His job was to introduce friction into the business process to make sure his company wasn't hacked. Simple. Now, if you're Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000, or even if you're a SaaS CISO, that no longer holds. You cannot introduce friction into the business process because security says so. That's just saying no to everything. And we've kind of taken that as far as we can. And now you hear us say, well, you have to say yes. But in saying yes, it means you have to negotiate with the lines of business as to how much business friction you introduce, not to secure the company, but to protect the company. So you see us now go from secure to protect, which means we're going to talk about risk now. And we're going to talk about detect, prevent, respond, recover, cybersecurity risk framework, which means at least now we're realizing it's not about all the tools and locking things down. It's managing risk against what the business will accept and understanding who owns what risk, which when we went to the cloud really accelerated that conversation because I no longer had control of my destiny. The business now had a lot more latitude. So what people call stealth IT or hidden IT is becoming more the norm. And then the third type of CISO, and this is, definitely the minority, is a business growth CISO. Like I said, my job used to be, how does that security tool sell more jeans? My job was not to secure the company. It was to protect the company, but then it became enable the company. How do I double the revenue of the company with security so that it's not a cost center, but it is a profit center enablement? And that's a very different perspective. And now with third-party risk for the cloud and all of the flexibility that the business is mandating in order to be able to increase sales, I've got to be able to flex and embrace the business, not mandate to the business. So you're seeing now there's three different perspectives we have to have as CISOs for our companies. And we have to figure out which of those three is primary and which ones are secondary, but we have to be good at all three now to be able to mature our own abilities as a CISO to be successful in this new world, and to be able to work with your executive teams and your boards, depending upon the size of your company, because they're also having different expectations on you. And one size does not fit all anymore.
Right. I'm curious from your perspective, what role can the sellers, the vendors, the cybersecurity vendors play in helping today's CISOs to really be seen and considered as those that actually enable business and not standing in the way of business?
Yep. The first thing I would say to a founder is, please don't marry the technology, marry the business problem. Stop thinking about the technology as the ultimate objective, and then making it my problem as a CISO to understand how to use that technology to solve a business problem. And that's what I mean, which was those days are gone. And so you as a founder now have an additional responsibility to know what it's like to be a CISO. to actually live in the CISO's head and see what it's like to be on the front end of a battlefield, not on the back end of a technology innovation conversation where you're here to help me by showing me more problems, expecting me to then prioritize and figure out how your technology has business value. And so that's why I came back to when I talked to the founders, you want to separate yourself from the noise. Coming here and saying you're helping me find more problems, so of course you want to buy my tool, is a 10-year-old problem, 5 years even. Now it's, if you don't solve a business problem for me, then I really don't have time for you, because I need to fix things, not find things. So I say, so what, now what? If you bring me a problem, you better bring me the solution. Otherwise, it might be interesting technology, but it'll never be important for me because I just do not have the time to do your job.
That brings me to another question, which is based on some messaging that I've seen recently, including during a Black Hat just a few weeks ago, where some vendors use statements, and I think these are old statements that are, for whatever reason, still exist, of we secure the internet, we prevent all breaches, all kinds of extremely bold statements. And those statements, typically I wouldn't even pay attention to, but they are coming from some reputable brands without naming names. And I'm curious, when someone makes those type of bold statements from a buyer, from a CISO perspective, I mean, how those are being viewed, how those are being considered?
So making a claim can damage your credibility right out of the chute. That it is such an outrageous claim that as a practitioner and somebody who's been in the trenches, I won't talk with you just because I don't appreciate what you just did. Okay. One of the things we haven't talked about is just how important your brand is and the trust. Because with 4,000 potential vendors out there, okay, for me to make a decision to pick somebody, again, you're not here to help me. I'm looking for somebody that is taking a problem off of my plate and accepting responsibility for it. You are now standing shoulder to shoulder with me, owning that problem, so that if you don't solve the problem, it's not just me that has a consequence. You do too. Okay. And that's the difference between helping and owning responsibility. Helping, I stand behind you and I whisper in your ear, hey, look over there, there's a bad guy. But I'm the one that's taking the bullets. Okay. Shared responsibility is you're standing right next to me. Okay. And we're both in the line of fire. And that's what you have to do. So when I hear some of these bold claims, there's this phrase that says ignorance is bliss. Okay. In some cases, you have people making these claims that don't actually understand what it's like, right? They haven't been on the front lines. They don't see it. And so therefore, it's just a marketing exercise. Okay. My sneakers are redder than yours. Okay. Well, whether they're redder or not, if I can get you to believe it, who cares? But in the way of security's thinking is, if you say that they're redder and they're not, and I'm counting on that red because I need people to have the visibility so that I don't get them in harm's way, that has true consequence. So it's the true consequence that people don't understand. The CISOs are now holding the accountability, right? And so then you say ignorance is bliss. They make the claim. And then you look at other marketing folks who, again, don't know security in other companies. So what are they doing? Well, they feel obligated to make an equivalent claim because they don't want that company to somehow get ahead. Instead of looking at each other and saying, look, there's enough money to go around. let's be really clear about what we do with the CISO and stand shoulder to shoulder, right? They're trying to do the help thing, standing behind. And that's why the CISOs no longer listen. That's why I think you're seeing a lot of this, how do you cut through the noise, is you have a higher responsibility now because the CISO does and you do. But when you're just hiring sales and marketing people from other verticals that don't do this, and they're trying to apply the same principles to get our attention, it's not working. Okay. And then the second thing I will say is, even 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, right, standard sales technique and marketing technique, get my attention, get me on the phone, get me in person, and try to spend 45 minutes or an hour with me and get me talking. So try to find a way to get my technology to stick on the wall by having you talk enough that I keep showing you how my technology is here to help. And that just doesn't work anymore. We just don't have the time or the patience. So you only have 15 minutes to demonstrate to me that you understand a problem. And from a business perspective, own it and can make it interesting to me. And if you can't, then I'm appreciative, but I've got to move on. And so this expectation now of being much crisper and clearer about your role in cybersecurity as a practitioner and as a vendor is one of shared responsibility. And I think that message hasn't quite made it through. And so therefore, a lot of the traditional sales techniques, where if you can even get them for 35 or 40 minutes, doesn't get you a second call because you've exhausted them and not respected them.
Yeah, I mean that's a great it's a great segue maybe to plug in something that I do under Vendor Expert, which is really teaching, coaching, and educating sales practitioners, professionals on how to speak the cybersecurity language and how to really don't sell a product, but really sell an outcome. Focus on an impact, a measurable business impact, positive impact to the customer. And really, that's all you're selling. It's not about the features, not about the technology. It's not about the, you're going to get breached unless you buy our shiny tool. Okay, that's the so, and that's a challenge that I've seen in many companies. I'm still seeing that, and that's why I'm passionate about someone like myself, who is both a founder as well as an engineer, but someone that also operated as a CEO, founder of 4 startups, etc. But that's really something that I think you definitely hit that nail on the head, so to speak. So that's close to home for me. So I think my other question is, so we talked about the fact that the market is shifting. The role of CISOs is also shifting. We are maturing as an industry. The buyer is much more sophisticated than they were 10 years ago. And there are some strategies talking about the customer's journey, which is really customer driving their business needs. And now vendors need to really help or partner with the CISO on their journey, on their business journey. My question to you is, do you think this is a long-term trend, or this is a cyclical phase, something that we go through every few years during a downturn cycle, or the fact that we are moving toward the security as a way to enable business, where the business is really driving the decisions, is for here to stay?
I think it's here to stay. I think the maturity of cybersecurity is on a steep incline. And that's just it. Even 4 years ago, where we were and now, the maturity curve is pretty steep, but we're not being proactive. It's almost overtaking us, and we're realizing what we're doing doesn't work. And then we're trying to react to it rather than see the curve and have the senior security practitioners be out front to help the industry. See, I use the word help, stand behind, as opposed to stand shoulder to shoulder, which is what I think we're doing today. We are actually standing shoulder to shoulder to acknowledge that we both are responsible for stopping the attack and that we're protecting all of our businesses, and the way that we have this conversation changes. And I'll say another way, which is efficiency versus effectiveness. How much of sales, especially during a recession, but even not, was efficiency? How do I do more for more? How do I do more with more? Or now is how do I do more with less? But in both cases, we're talking efficiency. How do I measure success? By the amount of technology I've deployed or the amount of training that I've instituted to be able to stop attacks. Except that we don't talk about stopping attacks. We stop at measurement for the controls and the training. And now the boards and the leadership, after all these years of investment and big budgets for security, are demanding accountability. The attacks aren't stopping. What are we doing to actually be effective at protecting our companies against key attacks, not just deploying technology to have a maturity conversation? And I think that is one of the underlying realizations that people are coming to grips with. So what am I doing to effectively protect my company against key attacks that will put it out of business? Not how do I implement a security framework and 30 controls and show you by measurement. So our metrics conversation is changed. And I'll use an actual example because I am sure that people are listening to us and saying, Steve, makes sense. You've been around. It's logical, but I don't understand how to do it. See, the difference is we got to show them. And I'll use Levi Strauss as an example here for the transition in conversation. If I went in initially for Levi Strauss as a technologist, I'd say, I've deployed MFA. I've deployed security awareness training. I've deployed my network firewalls. I've deployed my web application firewalls. And let me show you how much I've spent in all of the types of measurement that I see for those. Okay, I've got 98% of my people doing my annual security awareness training. I do monthly phishing attacks. Okay, I've got a network firewall established at my endpoint for my data centers. And here's how many endpoints that there are, and here's how many applications are working through my WAF. Great. But what are you doing against the attacks? I can't understand that. And so then you start to talk about, well, what am I doing to prevent attacks? So now you're saying, look, here's the controls I have for identity and access management. So I've got multi-factor authentication because the attacks for social engineering, the bad guys don't break in, they just log in. And so for human weakness, what are we doing? So I'm going to try to prevent it, and then I've got a SOC to detect and contain it. And they're like, well, that's better, but I'm still struggling because you're trying to teach me security, and my job is to sell more jeans. And then where you ultimately get to is enablement, and as what we did as we went through is I said, look, to the executive team, there were 3 things that I'm accountable for as a CISO. Okay, from a business perspective and business impact analysis, key areas of the business. 1, protect the brand. 2, protect my people. And 3, protect the supply chain. Because by protecting the brand, the Levi's brand is everything. Damage the brand, you don't sell jeans. What does that mean? I said 2 things. Protect the e-commerce site, because I don't want people defacing it, and make sure that the consumer information that I hold is absolutely protected to the best of our ability, because that social contract is the brand. Or it goes, oh, I get that. So now I go, let me do what I'm showing you. Protect my people, I said. Social engineering, number 1 problem. What are we doing to manage the attacks that are consistently happening and successfully? Boards like, get that, because I hear it. 3rd one was supply chain. Said, if we're not manufacturing jeans and don't have them in the store, we're out of business. So what is the impact to our material third-party supply chain? And then ultimately, as everybody goes into the cloud, to my cloud supply chain and the use of all of my business applications in the cloud and third-party risk. Okay, now we're talking about business value propositions and business impact analysis and an appropriate conversation as to where cybersecurity has a role to play in managing certain types of attacks and outages. Well, you have it that way. And now you see the transitions in CISOs and the transitions that sales and marketing have and founders have to be able to not marry a technology to help me, but to truly understand the business value of how what you do sells more jeans.
So I must bring something that I'm shocked we were able to avoid talking about, which is AI. So where do you add AI into the equation? I can guess where you would take it, but I would rather hear it from you because, again, AI, the way I see it, it's a means to an end. And, and we hear, obviously, generative LLMs, generative AI. Everybody's talking about AI. And that's another form of noise. And I think, but I want you to correct me if I'm off, that the same principles do not change. So I'm just curious, where and how would you plug AI into that considerations of innovation technology from a CISO perspective?
Sure. So when I look at AI, and there's machine learning, decision AI, and generative AI. So we have to think about that for a minute. And generative AI has most of the mind share right now. But if I oversimplify this first as to those 3 things, and then we're going to talk about it from security, is machine learning is correlation. Decision AI is taking that correlated information and acting on it, making a decision on it. And then generative AI is storytelling. Given a prompt, okay, it understands how to tell a story, compelling story, but it's not a decision. It's not based on making a decision. It's based on language. So if you think about it that way, and I go, first question I say is, how is it being weaponized? How is all that being weaponized against me as a security practitioner to break in against my controls? And you realize that correlation is threat intelligence gathering. Decision AI is the tools they have out there that are understanding how to exploit a vulnerability or a material exploitability and doing it. They don't ask, and it just knows, rips right through. And then generative AI from a weaponization is taking a persona, a human like you, Alon, and making your digital persona to be so perfect that I can't distinguish it from you, the person. Which means the weaponization of social engineering attacks is going through the roof, and they're becoming more and more effective against my controls because you're almost impossible to tell apart. But when I look at it from a weaponization on my side for defense, it doesn't really help me much, right? Because It allows me to generate reports automatically. So if there's an incident, I can generate a report. It might give me some visibility to be able to take a look at a perimeter or attack types, but it's not decision-based. It's not correlation. It's just simply telling me a story. Now, a lot of people will probably argue with that oversimplification, but I have to go there because I go, look, at the end of the day, what you heard was, one, how do I weaponize the technology for defense? We've just had this conversation. And now you see where I can have a limited capability for defensive weaponization, whereas offensive weaponization by the bad guys, generative AI, oh man, is 100-to-1 multiplier for them. The second thing we have to do then is, if I look at generative AI, how is I, as a security practitioner, actually building security around the models themselves? So this is a software development lifecycle process, which was, how do I build an ecosystem for the generation of all the models, the management of the data, right? The exposure of the data, the integrity of the output of the data. Well, we're doing a bunch of work now to be able to characterize what that software development lifecycle looks like. And we have to create some new infrastructure and technology. So I've got a role there. And then the third part is, okay, it's the business, right? And so the chat bots and all the ways that we can remove humans from the process, which is an efficiency play. Because many of our customers now, right, you and I are kind of the older generation, they don't want to talk to humans. So generative AI has this great opportunity to remove human friction from the process for many of our generations. And so therefore, that's a business enablement. But again, it now opens up the door, which is if the integrity isn't high or the outcomes aren't the right thing, I'm able to change behavior. I'm able to influence you to do bad things. Yet the business needs it because that's what the business is demanding. And so therefore, what do I do to comprehend that and enable the business to move the stuff at the speed of light, but still realize the security concerns as an attack perspective, as a software development lifecycle perspective, and as a weaponization. So that's kind of my longer answer, but I wanted to decompose it to say, that's how when I look at what happened on the floor at Black Hat, it's all about, from my perspective, simply an efficiency play, not an effectiveness play.
Hey, Steve, I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I appreciate you joining my podcast. I hope we can do that again real soon. And thank you so much.
Alon, thank you. And to the audience out there, I hope you found this valuable. We really tried to net it out. And we obviously looked at effectiveness. And so how can you effectively get through the noise, understand how a CISO looks at the world, and change your marketing and sales techniques to be able to be part of the solution, not just help me on a problem.
And Steve, if anyone would like to get in touch with you or maybe learn more about any of the topics that we've discussed today, is there a good way to reach out or get in touch with you?
Sure. One is LinkedIn. This is out there. You're welcome to contact me on LinkedIn. I do have an advisory practice, S3 Consulting. And so you can go out on the web, see that, and contact me either of those two ways. I'm always happy to try to do my part to own the problem.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you.